and unscrew this. Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I will be installing a 1TB SSD into my grandpa's late 2015 27-inch 5K iMac in place of his current Fusion drive setup. Let's get started. To begin the process, I started by making sure that my grandpa's existing Time Machine backup was up to date. I shut down the iMac and prepared the patient for surgery by unplugging its life support. That sounded better in my head. We then unplugged all the external hard drives and cables from the back and carried the iMac into the kitchen. In order to get inside a modern Intel iMac, there are no screws or magnets to be wary of. You quite literally have to cut the display adhesive off. Conveniently, the SSD kit came with an iMac display adhesive removal tool. This process was pretty straightforward and only took about 10 minutes, but you do have to be quite careful if you're doing this yourself, as one wrong move can send the display careening down to your table, or even worse, onto the floor, and shattering it into a million pieces. Thankfully this did not happen and the display came off in one piece. After removing the adhesive and disconnecting the display cables, I could lift off the display and place it face down on a soft surface to prevent it from getting damaged. Something I really admire about Apple devices is that Apple cares about how a product looks on the inside just as much as they care about how it looks on the outside. The next step was to remove the left speaker. This proved to be extremely difficult as the cable from the left speaker was wedged underneath the right side of the hard drive bracket, and as a result I couldn't disconnect the cable without actually removing the entire speaker first. I then proceeded to disconnect and remove the Seagate 2TB hard disk drive from the iMac. This step was nice and easy, which was pretty great, but unfortunately the next step was to remove the 300-watt power supply from the iMac. This was not only tricky, but also extremely dangerous. While it is somewhat unlikely, it's not impossible to receive a fatal electric shock as a result of touching one of the exposed contacts on an iMac's power supply. I decided to take every safety measure possible. This meant using anti-static gloves and only touching the edges of the power supply. Once that was finished, I removed the right speaker and the single system cooling fan. Yes, you heard that correctly, single fan. No wonder why these iMacs run hot. I disconnected the airport wireless card and headphone jack cable from the logic board after that. Now for the tricky part. Removing the logic board took quite a bit of time as the iFixit guide that I was following proved to be quite inaccurate in some places. The process was mostly straightforward, but when it came to actually trying to remove the logic board from the aluminum chassis, I spent about 20 minutes scratching my head wondering why it wouldn't come out after seemingly removing all the screws. Well, you know, if I'm taking a coffee break in the video, I might as well take a coffee break while doing this voiceover. You're welcome for that. On with the video. Turns out there are actually two more screws, conveniently not mentioned in the iFixit guide, securing the heatsink to the frame of the iMac. Once I finally got all that out, it was safe to remove the logic board and perform the task we've all been waiting to see, the installation of the new solid-state drive. Now ideally you probably should not use a vacuum cleaner to clean off computer components, especially ones that handle electricity, because vacuum cleaners have a track record of emitting static electricity and that can cause problems. I held the vacuum head a safe distance away from the logic board to prevent any of this from happening, but even still you probably shouldn't use a vacuum cleaner to clean off a logic board. Alright, so now for the exciting part where we're going to be installing the new solid-state drive. That is in fact T8. Alright, let's go ahead and unscrew this. There we go. Alrighty, I can gently pull, and voila! That is the old SSD. This is a 120GB Samsung solid-state drive, which we will be replacing with a 1TB. I don't even know which brand solid-state drive, but it's fine. Time to do an unboxing. This is from OWC, Otherworld Computers, or you can find it at macsales.com. I will leave a link to these parts in the description if you wish to purchase them yourself. And there we go. So that is the new SSD, 1 terabyte of super fast storage. Grandpa, would you like to do the honors? And you can see that the small side goes on this side, so we go ahead and just slide this in. There we go. Now it's in. Alright, and 1 terabyte SSD is now installed.
So it goes in the same place?
Yep, exact same place. So yeah, there we go. SSD upgrade complete. Time to put it back together. After that was all finished, I decided to clean out the internals of the iMac. This meant de-dusting the fans and the aluminum chassis itself. Funny thing, putting the iMac back together was actually an easier task than taking it apart. I began by reseating the logic board in place, making sure that the I/O on the rear of the iMac was lined up correctly. If you don't line up the I/O properly, it defeats the purpose of the ports simply because you won't be able to plug anything into them. I continued to follow the iFixit guide in reverse order, making sure to reconnect all of the cables into their correct sockets, and putting all the screws back into their appropriate places, then tightening them firmly. I did run into one issue, however, while putting the iMac back together. While attempting to carefully screw the hard drive bracket back into the iMac, one of the bracket screws fell off my screwdriver and got lost inside the power supply. Seriously, don't advertise a screwdriver as being magnetic if it can't even hold a single screw properly. I had to take the left speaker and hard disk drive out all over again just so I could tip the iMac upside down and retrieve my lost screw, which was arguably more trouble than it was worth. I reconnected up the display for testing purposes, yes, this meant not using the new adhesive yet, and then I used a Kleenex box to hold up the iMac so that the screen wouldn't slide off or anything. Alright. That's the sound I like to hear. Yep, there we go. That is what we want to see. Now all we have to do is just shut that off. Okay, this is where things should. The next step was to restore from my grandpa's time machine backup, or at least try to. Well, good to know the speakers still work. This would later end up being a mistake, as it turns out that you can't fit 2 terabytes of data onto a 1 terabyte drive. Who would have thought? I tried using Apple's Time Machine Restore utility, but that just ended up hanging at a screen that said calculating space required to restore your system. Needless to say, I gave up on that after about 15 minutes of watching the loading spinner spin for what seemed like an eternity. I ended up just leaving the Time Machine fiasco alone for a while, and we settled on simply reinstalling macOS in the meantime. One thing I forgot to mention earlier in the video is that while the iMac was still in pieces, I removed the old adhesive from the frame of the iMac and the rear of the display. Given that the computer was now fully functional after reassembling it, I thought it would be a good time to apply the new display adhesive to the front of the iMac. This wasn't as tedious as I thought it would be, and it was actually quite satisfying. Once that was finished, I applied the new adhesive to the rear of the iMac's display panel. Now that the adhesive was all ready to go, with the help of my grandpa, I proceeded to install that glorious 27-inch 5K display back onto the iMac. While I did get this process on video, my grandpa was standing in front of the camera, and just as he turned around I heard a large crash and looked over to see that the camera and gimbal were now on the floor. Both devices are still okay, and it did make an entertaining clip, so it's all good. And just like that, the iMac is all good to go. We brought everything back into the den, and now it's just a matter of copying over all the important things from the Time Machine backup. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, then I don't care. Thank you for watching, and thank you Grandpa for giving me the opportunity to upgrade your iMac. I'll see you all in the next video.